Hello there, Canadian Football League fans, and welcome to another look at a group of CFL All-Stars. In our last video, we covered the year that was 1993, but now we're going all the way back to 1976, a year where the league was actually thriving. Some of the most exciting football around, which included that year's Grey Cup, a thrilling outing in a battle of the Rough Riders, Saskatchewan and Ottawa, where Tony Gabriel's clutch catch in the dying seconds gave the Ottawa version their fourth Grey Cup in 9 seasons, scoring a bit of an upset that year. And today, we will look at the Western Division, and like our last video, we will keep track of the all-Canadian team on each side. However, we should point out that back at this point, punters and kickers weren't selected until the following year, 1977. And there was a tie for defensive backs, that's why you're seeing an extra spot. Also, 3 running backs were selected in this era as well. But before we get into the players, let's look at Canada in 1976. In the entertainment world in Canada, Canadian TV was dominated by the hit series The Beachcombers on CBC. Even this early in the show's life, it was dominating TV ratings, setting records. Also a surprise hit sitcom, The King of Kensington, set in Kensington Market, the working class Kensington Market, starring Al Waxman, also making waves on CBC. And a troupe of unknown comedians from Toronto, known as the Second City Troupe, were given their own television slot on the Global Network. Names like John Candy, Joe Flaherty, Andrea Martin, Catherine O'Hara, Eugene Levy, Harold Ramis, and Dave Thomas would all become household names down the line and garnered a cult audience. One of the most successful movie stars of this era was St. John, New Brunswick native Donald Sutherland. In 1976, he had prominent roles in 3 films. First was Bernardo Bertolucci's period piece epic 1900, which also starred Robert De Niro. While it received mixed reviews when it was released and wasn't a huge box office hit, it has since become a cult favorite. He then worked together with another legendary Italian director, Federico Fellini, in his film Il Casanova, with Sutherland in the title role. It was mainly a hit overseas in Italy, with limited release in North America. However, Sutherland received acclaim for his performance, and the film did as well. And he had another overseas hit with The Eagle Has Landed, a British war film where he co-starred with the likes of Michael Caine and Robert Duvall. This kid from St. John was making a name all over the world. And in Canadian music, one of the all-time great rock bands, Rush, released an album that changed the trajectory of their careers forever, the prog rock epic and classic 2112, which went from cult hit indeed to favorite hit album. April Wine remains one of the most popular arena rock bands in the country at this point, and their album, The Whole World's Going Crazy, went platinum before it was actually released thanks to advanced sales. Winnipeg's Burton Cummings, who spent a decade as the frontman and lead singer of the immensely popular rock group The Guess Who, pursued a solo career and had a worldwide hit with Stand Tall, which hit big here in Canada, as well as the US, and also places like Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. 3 of Canada's most acclaimed artists also had big years in 1976. Neil Young had a successful collaboration with Stephen Stills, going under the Stills Young Band, with their album Long May You Run, which achieved a gold record in the United States. Joni Mitchell also received a gold record for her critically acclaimed jazz vibe record, Hejira. And another iconic songwriter, Gordon Lightfoot, had a massive hit single with his 6-minute-plus epic, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the true story of a freighter ship that sank in Lake Superior in 1975. The song reached the top of the charts in Canada and was a huge hit in the US, hitting number 2. Alright, now on to the CFL All-Stars. First, let's look at how teams did in the West statistically. The Saskatchewan Roughriders finished in first place with an 11-5-0 record, the best record in the CFL. They won the entire Western Division, making it to the Grey Cup, however, before losing to Ottawa. A much-improved Winnipeg Blue Bombers team reached an excellent 10-6 record, while the Edmonton Eskimos, who were the defending Grey Cup champions, had a bit of trouble and were good but unspectacular, and that's going to be a common theme with them this season, at 9-6-1. The BC Lions had their 11th losing season in 12 seasons, but are showing some promise. They were pretty much the CFL's laughingstock, but that was about to change in the next few years. And for the Calgary Stampeders, since their Grey Cup win in 1971, they had their 5th straight losing season, a horrendous 2-12-2 campaign. And now, let's look at the All-Stars, starting with defense and the defensive line. First, we start with the Grey Cup runner-up, Saskatchewan, and at defensive tackle, Tim Roth. While he shares a name with a really great actor, he was a huge part of Saskatchewan's top-ranked defense, and obtained his 2nd straight All-Star selection. Off the snap, he was already to lunge at the given offensive lineman standing opposite him in order to target a given QB and put pressure on or derail a speedy running back trying to make it up the middle. While sacks were not recorded until 1981, the Saskatchewan defensive line definitely had many throughout the year and would likely lead the league. Even as the best offensive line had trouble containing the likes of Roth and others. Roth would retire from the CFL and the game of football after the 1977 season. One of the most feared men in the CFL was John Helton, the vicious defensive lineman for the Calgary Stampeders, who played with heart every bit as much as he played with aggression. Helton at this point was already a legend, and while the Stamps fans didn't have much to cheer about around this time, Helton was still the number one guy in their eyes, targeting any QB or whoever had the ball. Helton had you dead in his sights. Continuing to prove that he's one of the best, his 8th straight divisional selection of his career took place in 1976. And again, if only sacks were recorded in this era, Helton would no doubt have led the league on several occasions. And despite his on-field demeanor, he was also one of the classiest players in the game. And to top it off, he was named to the All-Canadian team, his 6th straight selection in that regard. For defensive end, we go back to Saskatchewan. One of the most athletic men who played a position in this era, George Wells. His athleticism and speed made him perfect for that rush end position, and could chase down the fastest QBs, making him a multi-dimensional threat. He was also good at causing fumbles and nailed many sacks and tackles for losses, making sure you lost as many yards as possible. Wells was an all-star already with the Hamilton Tiger Cats in 1972, and since joining the Riders in 74, this is his 3rd straight selection and 4th overall. And since this is Bill's Sports and Wrestling channel, I do indeed have to acknowledge his wrestling career. Hell, he even wrestled Jake the Snake Roberts at WrestleMania 2, but was also quite a journeyman in many wrestling territories, winning multiple titles along the way. This was also his 2nd Grey Cup game. On the other side of the defensive end spot, we got Sheridan, Manitoba native Bill Baker of the BC Lions, who at 6'3" and nearly 260 pounds showed great agility getting to quarterbacks quick and driving them into the turf. He is one of the best of his time at his position and maybe arguably one of the greatest of all time to actually play it as well. After becoming a star in Saskatchewan, this was his 3rd season with the BC Lions, and not only obtained his 5th All-Star selection, but he was rewarded with his very first Shenley Award for Most Outstanding Defensive Player in the CFL, and was actually a runner-up for the CFL's Most Outstanding Canadian that year as well. It was a banner year for Baker, who had become the most popular player on the consistently struggling Lions defense. A banner year for Baker, who would end up back in Saskatchewan after this season. But this will definitely go down as his best ever, as he also records his 4th All-Canadian selection. We now move to the linebacker position, and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers' first All-Star in this video, Harry Walters, who despite being deemed too short to be a defensive player, was always committed to every tackle he obtained, and wouldn't give up on it no matter how far anyone on the opposition ran. He became a quick fan favorite in Winnipeg, as this is his 2nd year with the club and 2nd straight All-Star selection. The Winnipeg defense definitely had its flaws mainly up front, but Walters was a consistent threat on the defensive side of the ball. His determined play and commitment to each and every play helped earn him his first and only All-Canadian selection. We continue with Saskatchewan's great defense, which was number 1 against the run in the CFL, and that was thanks in large part to Edmonton native Bill Manchuk, who had garnered fan favorite status in Regina, but now he was being rewarded for his abilities on the blitz, and despite being deemed too small, again, for any level of pro ball, he had a way of maneuvering around the biggest blockers in the league and doing it quickly. And he also made many key plays in the Western Final to help get the Riders to the Grey Cup. This would be his first and only All-Star selection. He would stay wearing the green until 1980 and then went back to his hometown of Edmonton to finish his career with the Eskimos for 2 seasons, collecting a couple Grey Cup rings in the process. Sticking with that awesome Riders defense at linebacker, Roger Gorey. Cool name, fitting for a defensive player. But much like Manchuk, he was quick to the tackles and could dodge blockers to get his man. A former All-Star in Calgary, he achieves his 3rd All-Star selection and 1st with the Riders. All year, he was a running back's worst nightmare. If you were fast, he could catch you before you could even get 5 yards. If you were playing fullback and a bit bigger, he'd take you on head on and swarm you with his arms, wrapping you so you wouldn't be able to get anywhere or push forward. He's also great at knocking down short passes or tipping them away from their intended target. There was a lot to this multi-dimensional talent. He had a banner year, and as a result, achieved his 2nd All-Canadian selection. And now we go to the secondary, where the Riders were every bit as dangerous as they were on the line. Well, leading the league with 35 interceptions. And leading that pack, literally, was Lauren Richardson, whose 7 interceptions was part of a 4-way tie for best in the league. Richardson, a native of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, was a thinking man's defensive back, able to read a given pass pattern to the receiver he was covering, which often led him to pick off even the most perfect passes. His skill at the defensive back position was well noticed from the moment he walked into the league, and in his 4th season, he obtained his 4th straight All-Star selection. And on top of that, this was also his 4th straight All-Canadian selection to boot. Next up, we go to the team with the second best secondary in the league with 31 interceptions, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Well, they were led by Brian Horosian, a 6'3" defensive back whose specialty was covering big tight ends or fullbacks going for a pass pattern. In addition to his tall reach and great grabs picking off passes, Horosian was also a great tackler, able to bring down just about anyone, making sure that even if a pass is caught, no extra yards were gained. This is his second straight All-Star selection, but his very first All-Canadian selection. Now for their first All-Star selection on this list, we finally get to the Edmonton Eskimos and first-year defensive back Joe Hulleman. Oddly enough, Hulleman only had just one interception all year. But when it came to pass coverage, he was one of the better in the league. His speed and ability to keep up with the fastest and most talented receivers made him an asset. And also, there weren't selections for special teams on All-Star teams yet, so we had to believe that this selection was based on his special teams prowess. He led the league with a combined 1,362 special team return yards off punts and kickoffs. And again, this is likely what won him the selection. He also returned 2 punts for touchdowns and became one of the most popular players in Edmonton in this era. Back to that awesome Saskatchewan secondary and Ken McEachran. He had 6 interceptions on the year, usually was placed in the safety position on the defensive back core, and was actually a precursor to one of the great Saskatchewan safeties, Glenn Suter. McEachran was great at making any QB pay a heavy price for a long pass, and making any receiver pay for even trying to catch the ball. His jarring hits could shake the ball loose from just about anyone. In addition to that, he was also effective on the safety blitz, recording a couple sacks to boot, even if they were unofficial. And he was great at putting QBs under pressure that way as well. Definitely a multi-talent, earning his first selection in what is his 3rd season. And the third of 5 spots occupied by the Green Riders on the secondary belongs to Paul Williams, who had 6 interceptions on the season. After 5 seasons in Winnipeg, where he had an All-Star selection, this was his first year in Saskatchewan. He helped make their secondary complete. Williams, much like the rest of the secondary, added speed, meaning not only could he make you pay the price with a turnover, he could return it for 10 yards or even more. Known to keep up with any pattern, he could frustrate elite wideouts throughout the entire CFL. His big season helped him earn his first All-Canadian honors, which means the West occupies 7 defensive spots, and since there's an extra defensive back spot due to a tie, that leaves 6 open for the East. And now we move to the offensive side of the ball and start with the Trenchmen, the offensive line. Al Wilson of the BC Lions will go on to become one of the all-time greats at his position, and this being his second of what would be 7 straight All-Star selections as well. At 6'2" and 250 pounds, he was as gritty as they came, not afraid to show a little extra aggression, but not careless enough to take too many penalties. He made sure any defensive lineman who dare cross him pay a hefty price. As a center, his quickness on the snap and hitting the block was by far the best in the CFL at this time. So much so, that this year of his second selection, he was a finalist of the Shenley Award for CFL's Most Outstanding Offensive Lineman for the very first time. However, for the second straight year, he was an All-Canadian. Next up at guard was the man that quarterback Ron Lancaster of the Saskatchewan Roughriders likely trusted with his life. He was so damn good at blocking, that being Ralph Galloway. Despite being deemed too short to be an offensive lineman, his ability to give Ron an opening to complete a play, and even giving running backs such as the now retired George Reed the opening he needs to make a big gain, were now among the best in the league. Now in his 8th season in the CFL, he's become the team's most trusted Trenchman on the O-line, also being a big help to Steve Monar, who, due to Reed's retirement, became the top man in the backfield and rushed for over 800 yards. And this being his 4th straight selection, it would actually be his first All-Canadian selection. We now shift to Winnipeg with Buddy Brown, selected as a guard. A former NCAA All-American, he comes over from the short-lived World Football League, but has a championship ring to show for it, and was an all-star in the league's only one complete season. He came over to Winnipeg the year prior, but only played 8 games, but plays a full season here. He was key in helping Winnipeg quarterback Dieter Brock have a breakout season, but his bigger contribution was his blocking for the Winnipeg backfield, which combined for a CFL best over 2,000 yards, the best running game in the entire league, of course. Brown would only play in the CFL until 1979, spending his entire time with the Bombers. At offensive tackle, 6'3" Lane McDowell of the BC Lions was effective on the stopping the most vicious pass rushers, and was key in the growth of quarterback John Sciarra, who won the Shenley's CFL Outstanding Rookie Award, making sure his quarterback didn't get flushed out and face too much pressure, being a bright spot in a lowly but yet promising year for the Lions. The Lions' offensive line was definitely the most fully structured part of that entire team, and because of McDowell is a big part of that, he earns his second straight All-Star selection. And we go back to Winnipeg, and the towering present known as fan favorite Butch Norman at 6'6", again was key in the Bombers' rebound as well as Dieter Brock's great season and the amazing Winnipeg running game. He was a wall in every sense of the word. Even the most aggressive, even the fastest pass rushers couldn't seem to solve him or dodge him. No matter how good they could maneuver, he always seemed to be in their face, not letting them get to his quarterback or his backfield, making sure a play was always executed successfully. It was his first All-Star selection and his first All-Canadian selection to boot. And now we move to the receivers, starting with a man in the trenches who can make the big catches, the tight end position. And it's native Hamiltonian and fellow Barton Baron, I might add, Bob Richardson. Now playing for the Saskatchewan Roughriders at a commanding 6'5" and over 250 pounds. He had a career year with 527 yards receiving, as he's efficient with those short first down passes or those two second and third patterns that often gave the Riders an advantage in a first down. But with his size, of course, his contribution in blocking was something to behold, opening gaps for the Riders' backfield and giving Ronnie more time to pass. He played in his second Grey Cup game, having obtained a ring with his hometown Hamilton Tiger Cats in 1972. This is his first selection. At wide receiver, Rhett Dawson of the Saskatchewan Roughriders, who brought NFL experience with him. In the last 2 seasons, however, he'd become a elite receiver in the CFL. He was second in both receiving yards with 966 yards and receptions with 65. His speed and pattern efficiency was uncanny, and was also big at coming up in clutch and dire situations for the Riders. He had a great reach, with his arms catching passes deemed difficult for most to obtain, and he was a danger on the short pattern or on the long ball. Very dynamic. He was Lancaster's favorite target for the last couple seasons. His ability to also make a huge catch while being heavily covered was also key in the success he had. He obtained his first and only All-Canadian selection this year and left the game of football shortly after the season ended. Staying out wide out, we moved to Edmonton, who, despite a winning record, didn't have much to show for on the All-Star side of things. And in his 6th pro season, George McGowan of the Edmonton Eskimos gets his 3rd All-Star selection. A former outstanding player winner in 1973, he was the precursor to another legendary receiver, Brian Kelly. His 833 yards receiving was 6th in the league, while his 60 catches were 3rd. Not only was he fast, but he had a long stride when he ran, helping elude tacklers. He was also key on short patterns to boot. His quick hands allowed him to snatch passes like he was swatting the quickest flies. And this is why he also obtained his 3rd All-Canadian selection. And now let us move to the backfield, starting with the BC Lions and Mini Mike Strickland. While there have been shorter running backs even around this time and in the history of the CFL, Strickland's 5'8" frame seemed like he'd be an easy target even in Canadian football, but that simply wasn't the case. Long before the days of Pinball Clemens, Strickland could bounce off big men tacklers and keep garnering those big yard scampers. His 1,119 yards were 3rd best in the CFL, and his 10 rushing TDs were also 3rd best in the league. He added 300 plus receiving yards. He was a danger on short patterns. BC, despite their struggles, had a potent offense, and Strickland was a major reason for that. He had a warrior heart the way he played, and wouldn't allow his size to defeat him. Remember that Winnipeg ground game I told you about that gained over 2,000 yards? Well, here's one of the reasons why. Steve Barrett, who, like Strickland and BC, used his small stature to his advantage. He was able to change trajectory in a snap and fool even the smartest tacklers and take off for long gains, having that prowess to follow the best blocks in any direction. Also, breaking tackles on men who towered over him at times was also something that made Winnipeg fans cheer for this little underdog. His 834 yards on the ground was 7th best in the league. On top of that, he had 330 yards receiving, but his special team skills were superb. 539 kick return yards and another 204 on punt returns, as he was 2nd in the CFL with 1,903 all-purpose yards. He shockingly left the game of football to pursue other interests after this season. And now we stay with the Bombers and moved to CFL's leading rusher, Jim Washington. He was fast, he could throw a good block here and there, he had efficient hands and could catch. He was the perfect running back in this era. He wasn't afraid to face tacklers head on, getting them a good stiff arm, wasn't afraid to put his shoulder into it. Even though despite having a decent size, he wasn't as big as most fullbacks, but still used whatever size he had to his advantage. His 1,277 yards were indeed the best in the CFL in rushing. He added 428 receiving yards as his button hook patterns were very dangerous and key in Winnipeg's offensive growth this year. His 12 rushing TDs were second best in the league. While he did have speed and agility, when he took off, his long stride in his run would make him even more of a danger, which is why Winnipeg's reliable offensive line made sure to give him that extra room he needed. And because of this incredible season, Washington, in addition to his first divisional selection, achieves his first All-Canadian selection. Last, and most certainly not least, quarterback, and the Western selection is one of the greatest of all time, in the final years of his career, but showing he truly is an ageless wonder, the Saskatchewan Roughriders' Ron Lancaster. By the end of the season, he was 38 years old, but playing like he was 28. He was also in his 17th CFL season to boot. He achieves his 7th All-Star selection, was named the CFL's most outstanding player for the second time in his career, playing in his 6th Grey Cup game to boot. He led the CFL in passing yards by far with 3,869. His 25 touchdowns were also best in the league, and his 297 completions were also by far the best in the league. They called him the Little General because while his size wasn't commanding, his presence was, and the way he could guide an offense like an army platoon with discipline and efficiency helped him perfect the CFL game like no other QB before him. This would be his last All-Star season before retiring in 1978, and went on to have a successful broadcasting career and a legendary coaching career later on. Of course, this all means Ron achieves his 4th and final All-Canadian selection. Well, the West occupies 7 spots on the All-Canadian front on the offensive side of the ball to boot, meaning 5 spots remain for the East, and that means 14 out of 25 are taken by the West, with 11 remaining for the Eastern Division. Out of the 24 All-Stars for the West, 5 have gained enshrinement in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. Ron Lancaster, in his first year of eligibility, was inducted in 1982. Later on, John Helton of the Calgary Stampeders was inducted in 1986. Defensive end Bill Baker received his call in 1994. 3 years later, iconic BC offensive lineman Alan Wilson got his, and in 2003, George McGowan of Edmonton got his recognition. Others could make arguments for the likes of Larry Holloman, the other Edmonton Eskimo on this all-star list, as well as Lauren Richardson, who was a very underrated defensive back, and same for Ken McEachran, both from Saskatchewan. To nobody's shock, the Riders dominated the way with 11 selections. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers' resurgent season gives them 6. The BC Lions, who are showing great growth and rebuilding, accumulate 4. The Eskimos, decent yet not exactly overly spectacular year. Despite their winning record, they only have 2, while the Lonely Stamps muster up 1. On the offensive side of things, it's no shock that the Bombers and Riders are tied for 4. The Bombers' ground game and their offensive line were amazing. Also, the Riders' passing game, led by Lancaster, was second to none. BC's offense was really good, but was also still growing as they needed more depth on their receiving core. Edmonton's offense was okay, but never consistent. Despite a winning year, everyone on that team just seemed unspectacular. The Stamps, other than running back Willie Burden, had no offense prowess to speak of, but he was outperformed by other running backs. Saskatchewan's defense was dangerous at every end, best in pass rushing, best in tackling, best in pass coverage. They couldn't be stopped. All the other teams were, again, decent but lacked in some areas. Winnipeg's defensive line didn't seem all that motivated. BC may have had the best defensive lineman in the game at the time, but little else. Edmonton, again, good but nothing special. Calgary, again, see what I said about their offense, only replaced Willie Burden with John Helton. Well, that does it for our look at 1976 Western Division All-Stars. Who will occupy the 11 remaining spots of the All-Canadian Stars in the East? Who will be named in the East? Tune in soon to find out. Any other CFL seasons you'd like to see us cover? Leave a comment below for suggestions. In the meantime, hit like, share the video, and please subscribe. Until next time, I'll see ya!